Okay, thanks for joining us. Today we wanted to just do a quick video on basic editing and essentially when to cut. And we've all have our editing softwares and learning and editing how the software works, but there's not too much out there about well exactly when do I cut something. So there's editing is basically an art. There's more to it than just um, it's not an exact science. It's more of an art, and you have to just learn and practice to get good at it. So we're just going to go over some basic concepts here real quick, and I'm borrowing the sequence from Breaking Bad when Walter White meets Tuco. And you can find this on Google. I would encourage you to watch it first and then come back and we'll walk you through this. So, the first thing I wanted to talk about is that when you're splicing two sequences together, um, this is the first one I want to talk about, is where he enters the office to meet Tuco. Um, it's a following shot, it's a tracking shot, it appears to be handheld. It's a creative framing because it doesn't show his hands or his feet. We really don't know exactly who that is, but we have a sense that something's going to happen and that this is real. And he has his hands free, the emphasis on his hands, which symbolizes work, something's going to happen. But where do you cut is the question. And so what they do is they have this tracking shot of him coming in. It's a following shot, and then they cut to a tracking from in front, kind of a medium shot of him still coming in a little bit more. And what they did actually, if you go back and you watch the sequence, is they advanced it just a few frames, or what I like to call is the blink of an eye. So when they put these two scenes together of him entering the office, it's a following shot. Then it goes to a front shot, a medium shot. He's still moving forward, but the camera is still. They advance, they splice those two scenes together by what I would say is maybe 5 or 10 frames. It's just what you would, the time that it takes to blink an eye. And so if you figure, film is 24 frames per second, you're wanting to show like a continuous action. You can advance it just a few frames actually, and it is in the time that it takes to blink, and no one will notice that, and it provides a nice continuity. If you overlap those actions, it wouldn't quite look right. It would seem like, well, didn't we already see him do this? It might look strange and odd. But by just advancing a few frames, you really keep it believable and smooth, and you don't really even sense the cut that much. And that really is the goal. Now, the second thing I want to talk about is cutting for dialogue. And in this sequence where Tuco is talking to Heisenberg, uh, they're pretty much cutting on the line. So he says, "What's your name?" And he goes, "Heisenberg." And he goes, "Heisenberg. Okay, Heisenberg. Have a seat, Heisenberg." And he says, "Well, I don't imagine I'll be staying that long." It's just they're actually cutting on the lines, and actually the dialogue lines. So some guy says something, cut. Go to the other guy. He says something, cut. That's really not a very good way to edit. But I would say about 60% of this sequence is done that way, and maybe 40% of it is cutting for reaction. So as Tuco's talking, he says something like, "Oh, I remember that. You're that. So you must be Daddy." And they cut away to him, or he could have been putting the cigarette out on his tongue. I can't remember what scene that was, but we're seeing that Walter or Heisenberg is not talking. We see his reaction. So don't get trapped into cutting after each actor is finished talking. Learn to cut for reaction. So the person can be talking off screen, but we're seeing the reaction of what that person is saying. So that's one of the kind of a sign of amateur editing is when it's cutting on the line. You want to also remember to cut on the reaction to see reaction versus just line for line. And kind of the third thing I wanted to talk about was opportunities for cutting. And in this one, that's not crystal meth he actually has there. It's some kind of explosive chemical. And he throws it on the ground. And as soon as that thing hits the ground, it cuts to an outside view of the window exploding. And that's a perfect opportunity to make an edit is on an action or on a noise. And these categories aren't discrete because you can have a noise and an action together, and that's exactly what we have here. We have an action and a loud noise, and that's the opportunity that they use to put the cut in, is on the noise or action. And then the fourth here, they have this is kind of a traditional idea, but you have your actor completely exit the frame, and that's what they know as a clean exit. And if you can get that done, if that's feasible for you, that's what you should usually do, because then once the actor is off the frame, out of the frame, it opens you up to cut to any other scene, because there's not necessarily any expectation that's clean. So you've kind of got a clean exit, and then that means you can have a clean start somewhere else. So that's exactly what they do in this scene. Is Walter Heisenberg, he exits and goes a clean exit off the screen. And then the next thing we see is an overhead shot of him exiting the building. And again, from the time where we saw him clean exit to here, it's, we can take, know he was walking downstairs. It probably took 15-20 seconds. Well, we know that's more than a blink of an eye, but we're accepting it because it was a clean exit, and so we accept that there's been a gap in time, but we don't really take it that hard, because we can splice those gaps together in our mind, and we accept that. There's some more editing that comes up here where we're going to switch down to it's what they call, again, a following shot, which really establishes him as a character in the environment. And so this is just a real-time shot now. So we've kind of used the editing to cover some gaps in time from when he actually left the office building to when he came out of the building, and now we're actually back in real time here, and which conveys a real sense of immediacy, and that we're there with him as he's walking through this. Yeah, it looks like kind of a bad neighborhood, but as he's walking through here, we get a real sense to identify with him in the shot. But it's going to switch around here the very next shot, and again it was a blink of an eye cut from the shot just prior to that to this shot. The camera's now tracking him, but it's in front. Because it's in front, we actually can identify with him more as a person, as just versus the previous shot, which was more of a character in the environment. So this gives us the opportunity to really relate to him more, and we see, he's actually got a bloody nose, and we feel a lot more for him in this scene. But going from the cut, it was really, again, just a blink of an eye. They looked like they just advanced it just maybe few frames from the previous shot to this shot. And then the last thing is, just kind of a general note, the very last scene of this sequence is really powerful, because he's going through some kind of inner transformation as in his character, and he has a moment there where I'm not exactly sure what he's experiencing, but you can tell that he's got a lot of pent up rage and anger, and it's changing him. This is all changing him, and there's no substitute for good acting, which you have with him. And you notice in this sequence, as powerful and memorable it is, he doesn't say anything. And so he carries all the action inside of the car. It's a close-up. We can relate to him, and it's just very well done. This whole sequence was very well done. So just to summarize a bit on when to cut, if you're going to splice two scenes together, you can bump it ahead a few frames, basically the blink of an eye. You can cut on lines in dialogue, but it's really not recommended. You should really cut for emotion or reaction. So you don't just cut line, he says something, they say something, and you're just going back and forth. You want to show the person's reaction while the other person's talking. And then you can always cut for a sound or on an action itself. And the most obvious thing really is just to cut out what you don't need, and is really not necessary for the story. And that can be hard sometimes, because if you are the one that shot the film as well as the one that's editing it, it's hard to cut scenes that a lot of work went into. But you've got to be honest and ask yourself, does this really advance the story? And if it doesn't, you really should cut it. So this is just a quick little tutorial we put together, and hope you find it helpful.